So my name is Karl Jankowski, and this is Network Assessments, Cybersecurity, Quackery, and Fraud. And let me just start off by saying I'm absolutely humbled to be in front of all of you guys. Did I just see a blink? I think I saw a blink. I'm absolutely humbled to be in front of all of you guys. I've met some of you at RVA at the Thursday nights, and I'm wowed by the amount of perspective and insight that you all bring. So just thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk to you. And thank you to Chris and Jake and the whole team, because you guys are awesome. So in the interest of really just keeping everyone's time respected, this is primarily focused on small business owners, executives, and those that work in IT. My perspective, though, is from a managed service provider standpoint, so it's also maybe for MSPs. It's a little angled. And primarily for information technology governance enthusiasts. Is there anyone here that identifies themselves as such? All right, we got 2, right on. Okay, 3, awesome. So I consider myself an information technology governance enthusiast. I got here by ways of 21 years working software development. I began my career sort of as a lowly help desk technician and worked through system administration and engineering and so on and so forth. And I got to some of the more important strategic parts of business, and I found that governance linked some of the things I learned early on, the basics, the fundamentals, with doing the right thing. I also, I'm trying to think where I want to go with this for a second. Oh yeah, so the other thing is governance for me has led me to a path where I was able to develop and build a successful SOC 2 program in a relatively short period of time, and that's probably one of my bigger achievements for the past year. Very proud of it. I think that's something that brought value to where I'm at, and obviously kind of formed the basis for the SOC. The journey here we're going to be on is going to be, it's really 2 acts. It looks like 3, but it's really 2. There's a setup, and the setup is essentially me talking about an email that kind of got me thinking into this rabbit hole. And then the performance. The performance is sort of how we can go on and do something that's better than what the setup brings forth. So that's sort of the approach we're going to take here. So some context, as I shed some pages, pages and pages of notes. Some context. What I want to first of all say is what are network assessments? And that's sort of a unicorn term. I think it's very much like saying cloud. Doesn't really mean much. What are they useful? When are they useful, and how are they applied? So a little bit of backstory, a little bit of history here. Number 1, I think technology assessments started in the 1960s when technology became a thing, and they were really they were designed to figure out how technology could be misused and sort of when it didn't work right, what could you do? The rest of it really didn't matter to me because I wasn't there for it, but we eventually reached the point where the Microsoft Security Baseline Security Analyzer made its first appearance. And that was sort of a pivotal moment for me personally along my path. It was in 2004, and at that point in time there was a shift, I think, from a situation where systems were open. If you deployed a Windows server, for example, it had sort of no permission sets and everything was available, to a least privileged type of concept. So I think that was a material point. And the Baseline Security Analyzer was sort of the first tool that I've personally come in contact with that ran against a configuration, and it told you the things that were potentially wrong and the things that you needed to do to fix it. So it was in context, it ran on a system that you cared about, and it did something very specific, and it gave you actionable results. Then time, Facebook, phones, smartphones, and all that stuff happened, and we arrived at the beginnings of ZTA, and what I think was, despite the fact that I do not disagree with all the stuff said about Beyond Corp, I think the pivotal moment was 2019 when NIST published their ZTA architecture papers. I think at that point in time, it just sort of turned a trickle to a fire hose, and we sort of really quickly steamrolled into the situation we're in today, which is the push for ZTA compliance and ZTA implementation across enterprise and small business. So I think that's where we are today. And as I said, this is really about small business, right? So the reason small business excites me is small businesses are like frustrated puzzles. You sort of, if you were to the thrift store and pick something up, you may not know what it is, but you want to put it together, and they don't really have all the resources, all of the time, all of the knowledge to actually do cybersecurity well, but some of them try. And my favorite example is my lawn company. Their job is primarily to spray toxic things on my grass. And they have, they use a portal. Now, granted, the portal is not theirs. The portal is from a vendor they chose, but their vendor displays their SOC seal proudly. And the SOC seal is meaningless. That's not the point. The point is that they felt it was so important to show that they're doing the right thing that they went out and plastered that on every single page that's inside their application, which is something I don't think I ever see anywhere else. So someone out there decided that this was important, and they wanted to share that not only with their customer, who is in fact the lawn company that does all this, but also the end user, which happens to be me. And doing the right thing is going to be a big premise here. All right, so now the setup. So I think we can all agree that we're at a juncture at this point where everyone is trying to do something. Enterprises are scrambling, and I would say small companies more so than anybody else. Small companies, but anybody else they want a magic pill. Small companies often aren't really willing, or often aren't able to just say, we're going to do all of these things properly. What they want is they want to go to somebody and say, hey, fix our problems, and then take a pill, and then know everything's okay. And my argument is that that's not really possible, that you have to do some of the work. You have to do the groundwork, and whether you are a manager who thinks this is not my area, it is. If you're a business owner, it's definitely your area. You have a lot to lose. If you're a small company, how many of you work for small companies here? All right, okay, small part. Well, how many of you are affected by small companies in your day-to-day? Okay, that list is a little bit bigger. So doing the right thing in cybersecurity isn't always often about doing the right thing for your business. It's really doing something right for your customers or your customers' customers, right? So, and if you're a small business owner, if you make a mistake, there is no like file for bankruptcy, check a box, and then restart. You lose everything. So I think they're more likely to fall for snake oil. So this is how all this started. I got a vendor email. And I say this all started, I mean this talk, the premise for this talk, and sort of everything that I wanted to cover today. I received an email from a vendor who prayed and sprayed an advertising campaign inviting me to a webinar. Some of you may have even seen this. And what that email said was MSPs who use said product closed 7 out of 10 new business opportunities. And I saw it, I had to archive it, I had to touch it, that was my mistake, filters were not set up correctly. So I did, and it just stuck. And I have like some serious cases of ADHD, so that really stuck, and it bothered me, and I kept going back to it, and I kept rereading this message going, why? Like, oh, why is this a thing? And I thought I could just forget about it, but I couldn't. So I decided to dig deeper. And there were really two things about that email that bothered me. One was the claim of 7 to 10 new business opportunities. I really didn't know what those could be. Part of me believed that the business opportunities were essentially like, I go to a prospect and talk to them, and now I have a sale. The other part was like, well, maybe it's not. Maybe it's something simpler. Maybe it's, like run a scan and open up some tickets and bill for that. So I really didn't know what it was. I thought it was kind of dubious. I also was kind of bothered by the fact that it was 7 out of 10, right? Like it was a really high percentage, so I thought maybe a little bit puffery. And mind you, this is just an advertisement email that's in an inbox that's like flooded with things all the time, but this one stuck out. So I decided I was going to approach it methodically, and I was going to follow a process to try to understand what the claim was, and then maybe come up with an alternative for it. So I set up 4 biases, and they were biases. Later, they might have been something else, but at that point, I was really kind of jaded about the whole thing. So I said, all right, well, I think there's some puffery and deception happening there. So that's the claim. I think it might be a little self-serving, and I really believe in being fiduciary when you're in IT. I think that if you're providing a service to customers, it should be a fiduciary responsibility. I think you should always work in the interest of the client, whoever the client might be. So if you're working for a company, your client is potentially your employer in some respect. And I think you should do your job well. Come back. There we go. I also kind of postulated that there's really unlikely to be any material benefit to the customer's customer. In this case, the MSP chain is the customer is right below it. And perhaps you should avoid it. And maybe, because there was a claim somewhere along the way that I discovered that they were like the #1 tool for this particular thing, so maybe there's a popularity that was there rather than usefulness. And I set out to create a process for myself that would allow me to kind of shed these biases. Because I figured if I can prove one of these wrong, I'm done, and I can forget about this and move on with my day and everything else that I happen to need to do. So I looked at the supply chain, and looking at supply chains and cybersecurity is very important. And I kind of tried to place where the email came from and where it was in relation to my customers, or to customers, and where it came and how it sort of flowed from all the way to the top, as you can see, and all the way down. And what I've come to realize, it was really top heavy. There was a lot going on. There was a lot of money moving upstream. So like everyone was taking a dime, and I sort of felt like, okay, well, this isn't really helping. So I moved on to the next item, Google searching. I really, really like image searches in Google. It's one of those things that helps me stay sane. Again, ADHD. And I did some stats. And I did something very basic. I figured network assessment for them really meant IT assessment, so I went ahead and ran that. And about a quarter of the results I thought were useful. And what that meant for me was that there was a lot of canned stock photos, a lot of imagery that was sort of useless. But there were some items that in my search either had a figure, a flow chart, or something that I could grab onto, something that was informative. So I thought to myself, okay, cool. I'm going to go ahead and use that as a guide. And then I plugged in some other terms. And I found that, interestingly, about 60% of the results were informative. I didn't know what that meant at the time. But again, I was just trying to convince myself that I didn't have to do this. And I also did network assessment, which turned out there was zero information. It was all canned images, all stock photos, just people doing this or whatever. So that was kind of a flop. Again, it was not helping prove anything. It was just kind of reaffirming that I was chasing something that I really could do away with, but here it was. Then I asked myself, what is network assessment? And because there wasn't really anything useful for network assessment itself, I went through and I figured IT strategic assessment was probably the best option. Found this image. I'm sorry, I forgot to attribute it. But I think the lesson learned there in this particular figure was that, man, it's a lot of things. It really covers a broad scope of, and imagine that somebody coming in saying that we're going to do all of these things for you at the beginning. I thought that was, again, not really going to be the right path. So it just, again, reaffirmed the biases. I didn't stop there because I was really in this hole, so I went ahead and joined the webinar, got the demo and everything else, and got the software. Got the user guide, decided I was going to run it, see what it looked like. And of course, right out of the gate, it said that you'll need admin credentials from your prospective client to scan the network using their data collector. At this point, I was fairly certain from this user guide that told me how to sell this product that this was meant to go to a new customer, a prospect, a small business, and do all of this, run it, and collect data. And I thought that was a bit scary. In fact, I thought that every single one of those 7 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 may have experienced a security incident in that process, because how else would you define this? You just let a stranger in and gave up your everything. So I thought that was a bit foolish. And again, it wasn't really helping. And that thought really, really stuck, because I'm going, all right, 7 out of 10, at least those guys went in, and let's just assume for a second that the claim is in fact what it is, and I think we all agree it's puffery, but let's just say, take it at face value, the 7 out of 10 at least became customers, and eventually they would have handed over that information anyways. But what about the other 3? Those just walked away and potentially left all those holes open. So that was, again, not working well for me and for the way I like to think. Ran the tool. It did exactly what it said it was going to do. It scanned, and it collected a whole lot of information about everything. And again, just reminding you all that this is, in fact, happening at a prospect. And it generated a report. The report, it was one of those Christmas tree reports where you had red, yellows, and greens. And there was a lot of reds in my lab environment, intentionally so. And I scored a 97. 97 risk units. It also gave me an overall weighted issue score. didn't really have anything on the graph. And now this is a bit disingenuous. There's more information there. Obviously, there was many, many things. But this was the whole thing I was doing here was just trying to say, all right, this is fine. This is fine. My customers, if they're out there and they're going to do this, whatever, it's not going to be that bad. And all of this is just reaffirming this is not fine. This is bad. And specifically that, because I figured that this was actually really, what it was really doing is causing me to have emotions. It was getting me angry, and it was getting me curious, and that was frustrating. So I was chasing it, right? And it was probably trying to elicit fear, and I think fear came in 2 stages. Fear is, ooh, things are really, really bad. There's ransomware. There's identity theft. You got to do something about it. And there was urgency in it. Oh, sorry, I said 2 stages. And the other one was obviously the report. Scary results, scary findings. Urgency, you got to do something about it right away, right? There was a lot of phrases in the outcome that said, hey, you got to immediately remediate this and that and the other. And of course, it's all right. We'll take care of it all for you. Helpfulness. I have a little bit of background in social engineering, and I knew that at least 4 out of 5 were essentially the same traits you would do to socially engineer an organization. So I, again, felt like maybe this was just reaffirming my biases. So the lesson I had at that point was that this idea of coming in and scanning an environment and getting results back and learning something about it is good, as long as it's applied properly. But I felt like someone here went in and deconstructed something that was very useful, packaged it in another way, and then sold it as a complete solution. And what I was most concerned about, and what I am most concerned about today, is that this is potentially happening to small company after small company who are looking for this quick fix, that are looking to solve a series of really complex problems, and they don't know where to begin. And my overall view of this is that those companies that don't do the legwork and try to learn a little bit about cybersecurity will end up in a situation where they'll just be taken advantage of. They will in fact be exploited because they will feel like something was accomplished. You'll run the report, you generate a whole bunch of red flags, you fix red flags, you run the report, you get green flags, and everything's fine. And I think all of you guys can agree here, that is not what cybersecurity actually is. Mainly, just in case the point is missed, isn't that you have to fix those, it's just you may not have to fix the things that it brings up. Because you have to have a strategy behind selecting what is it that you're going to be fixing. Those red things might be fine. It is your choice. So, in Act 2, I want to sort of place network assessments and whatever else you want to call them, vulnerability scans and everything else, in their context, and hopefully take you through a crash course in IT governance. My intent behind this is for anyone, and your audience, the audience here is really small for this, anyone who is interested in building a cybersecurity program can maybe come away with this with some bullet points that they can hit to do this themselves. And I don't know why I keep looking at that to read my own slides. They're right in front of me, but I keep doing it. So when you are starting cybersecurity, or if you're in a point where you're trying to tackle this mess that we're in right now, trying to implement ZTA or whatever it is that you're trying to do, the first question to ask yourselves is, what is a good level of cybersecurity? And the answer is that it varies, and it depends entirely on your business. That answer, despite all the standards, despite everything else out there, is completely contingent upon the people that run your business. If you don't care, that's fine. That is a good level of cybersecurity. It is your choice. Once you figure that out, you can decide, you can start prioritizing important projects, and you can figure out what you're going to tackle. So really the lesson here is that you need to break down this complex problem into a series of small ones. And the third one is really kind of out of place, but I do find it really important, and that is, where do certifications fit in? And specifically, I want to circle back to that SOC 2 certification. That's not the point. That one isn't important. What is important, though, is that it makes you think about what the companies are doing, and it gives you a perspective that you can use to then evaluate your vendors, the companies you work with, or even yourself. The actual, it's all rubbish because it's custom to whatever it is that you want it to do. So your SOC seal simply displays the fact that you did things you said you were going to do. They may not mean anything, but it also means you give it a shot and you did something important. In small companies, that's the best you can hope for. So I want to move away from using the word risk assessment, network assessment, all that. Sorry, network assessment and IT assessment because, like I said, I don't think they mean anything. But I like using cybersecurity evaluation. That's sort of my go-to word for this, and that is because it is more focused. It focuses the information security problem, not the whole HR and everything else that you guys saw on the previous one of the earlier slides. And it's really 3 objectives, right? It's to evaluate, guide, and provide. Evaluate your existing environment and potentially reevaluate it later to see if it's working as expected. Guide, give some answers, give some remediations and some actions that you can do that will help. And then provide some sort of a report that you can give to people that maybe don't understand the technical stuff. So the point is that everything that I showed you initially in that network assessment, those are all pieces that were in there, but they're just misused. To set up any kind of cybersecurity, small company or large, you need a framework. You need to pick something. And that was covered by the previous presentation. I've, at this point, developed my own, but it's built in NIST, and you don't really need to know much in terms of doing this. A framework is simply a collection of best practices, and you got to pick one that will work. FINRA has one that's incredibly simple to understand, plain English, written out. You can implement it at any level. FINRA handles financial services, but their actual framework is relatively simple. NIST obviously has far more complex, and as the gentleman before me talked about, there's others. This should really be a cycle that really didn't look great on this PowerPoint, so I kind of left it as a stack. But the purpose of a framework is to give you the collection of best practices and then to help you understand a problem, whatever that problem might be, whether it be one item, one small item, or something very big. Develop some sort of approach to dealing with it. Give you a blank screen. Show you a way to safeguard, in this case, because we're focusing on information security, the system that you're trying to protect. Confirm that it works, and ultimately learn from it and do it again. You will need some policies. And policies they sound boring. I don't think they are. How many of you have had to agree to IT policies as part of your job? Like, pretty much everybody. Did you all read them? Who read them? Nice. Okay. Well, reading is unfortunately, we track, so in my world, we track the time people spend on the document and how quickly they hit accept. Those numbers are not good. There's a lot of this. And part of the problem is we're dishing out 22 now, so there's quite a bit in there. But the point is you need something. And for small companies, policies don't have to be complicated. The point is they have to be written so they're easy to understand, and they have to convey something meaningful, and you have to agree as a business to stick to them. Most importantly, I would say information security is your general approach. If your general approach is call Steve and have him help us, write it down. And let that be your information security policy. If you want to be more developed, please do. My point is commit to something. Commit to doing a risk assessment. And that risk assessment can be something that you've studied for and went to school for. Or in my case, one of my favorite risk assessments has been a risk assessment Jenga. We write a bunch of words that we think are meaningful to our business on a Jenga. And whoever loses that game is writing up the report. And then in the process, as we pull blocks, we talk about them. And we talk about the scenarios, the inventory, the things that might actually influence our operations and what it might do to our business or to our customers. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but I'll touch on incident management. You should always have an incident management plan, even if, again, it's calling Steve. Have something. Hopefully a lot better than that with call trees and procedures and things like that, but have something written down. And you will find that most small companies out there, and I'm talking like 50 users and less, they even just have nothing. They don't know what to do. They'll get an email, a phishing email, and they're stuck in their tracks. They just don't know how to respond to it. The list here is what I think is most important, and it's what I would start with if I was ever building a cybersecurity program for a small company. The way you get those, or the way you can get started with those, doesn't have to be costly or cumbersome. If you were to Google any one of those, you'll find, and you can pirate tons of copies. They're everywhere. But you can also go to SANS, and they have great templates you can begin with. SANS Institute is, I would say, one of the authorities on this. Or you can go to a commercial company that's going to write them for you. The problem with that is that I think they should be homegrown. I think that whatever it is, you should work on it yourself. So this is a good starting point. You're going to need controls. Controls in a cybersecurity program inform how to do something, but they don't necessarily write the specifics. These are my most important ones, I think. There's a lot more. In my current place, we have 80 controls that define everything else that we do. I think it's typically, from my understanding and sort of working in my world, it's anywhere between 60 and 120, but you don't need that many. Sometimes it's just the ones that really matter the most. Like MFA today, I think is accepted across the board as a thing that we all should be doing. Interestingly, though, your control should at least define how it's going to be implemented. And if any of you guys are using Microsoft 365, and this was brought up many times before, it's voluntary compliance for MFA until you can implement conditional access. So maybe as a policy to your business, you'll say, like, look, we're not going to just volunteer people to do this. We're going to buy and implement every single thing that will let us to enforce it so that it's on. And then if we work with vendors that may not have support for it or doesn't work the way we want to, we will explore that and document that, or maybe choose different vendors, or just make sure we have compensating procedures for it. That one, the first one, that's like 90% of all breaches that Microsoft 365 has. And I would be willing to believe it's because no one ever at the business said, just do this. Research it and do it. User access reviews. One of the ways I found them to be useful isn't because you go and check what privileges people have, but software changes, security options in software changes. Have someone look at it once in a while, be it once a year or whatever, but take the moment, dedicate time, dedicate the resources to have someone review the mission critical stuff and see if there's new technologies that were built into it that are important. If you did that, going back to Microsoft 365, you'd probably realize that you had to shift plans to get some of the additional benefits that Microsoft offers. That's only done if somebody's actually paying attention. And I'm only going to talk about 3 like before. The other one I think is most obvious, data backup. I follow the 3-2-1 rule. 2 on-premise, 1 on-site for every single mission-critical piece of data that's out there. Now that sounds pretty obvious to some, but again, when you're dealing with small business and you say, hey, listen, I don't think you're following the 3-2-1 rule when it comes to your Exchange mailboxes or your SharePoint data, they're like, what are you talking about? It's in the cloud. Well, Microsoft doesn't cover you for your own stupidity. You're not covered for the mistakes your employees are going to make. They cover you in case their data centers blow up. You need something else. So if you simply say, we're going to do 3-2-1 on every single mission critical piece of data, and then you look to make sure you're doing it, you now have a control, and then how you implement it is going to depend on whatever stack you're running. The other ones I don't think are any less important, but I don't want to spend time covering them because I tend to run long, although I am talking fast. If you need to know what controls to implement, once again, you can go to someone out there that sells them or preps them for you, but you don't have to. One of my favorite and small business-friendly options is the Adobe Common Controls Framework. Who's heard of it? Nobody. It is an Excel file and a PDF they publish that has a long stack of things your business can do that you can simply extract out of. And even if you don't understand what they mean, I mean, you guys do, but perhaps your bosses don't, it is something that you can absolutely work with. It digests complex problems into simpler things that it breaks down complex problems into simple things that are digestible. And it is available to anybody. Although I think you might have to provide your name and email address to Adobe in order to get it. Well, if you download from their site. Oh, no, do not do that. Oh yeah, sorry. So what's really cool about the common controls, I didn't want to touch that because I don't think it applies to small business. What they actually do is they map them to not just, I cut it off there when I took the screenshot, they map them across the board to like every single framework out there. So they break them down and distribute them in ways that I think are like management friendly, small business friendly, people that don't have time friendly, people who are non-techies friendly. But they map it to legit stuff that is published by the big guys. That's value added, probably not that important. You will need some tools. There's only 2 tools that I think are really important. You need something to document. And when I say document, you need something that will do volume and velocity. And that's hard. And I don't necessarily mean like, oh, that's really annoying. I don't really mean anything that is mission specific. The more flexible and the more open it can be, I think the better off you will be. Because sometimes your documentation is a screenshot. Other times your documentation is a procedure. You want to, sometimes a table or an attachment. Have a place where you can dump all of that in. You will need a relational database. This is a hard one. It took me a long time to struggle with this idea. Because if you go to a commercial company that does all of this for you, they will tell you you're done with spreadsheets. And of course you're done with spreadsheets. They don't work for this. This is too complex of an issue to track in a spreadsheet. You will eventually exhaust yourself and you'll regret it. You need some form of database. It doesn't have to be complex, but it needs to be something that you can draw relationships between records. So if you have a person in your firm, in your business, whatever, that can potentially work with something like that, you're in good shape. If you don't, you're in a little bit of trouble. But the world's making that a little bit easier. The third is, I do think that you need to pick one tool, something that you're going to pay for and use, and that's up to you. I have my own favorites, but I do think that at the end of the day, small business is going to spend some money. That's going to sort of help the compliance process run through. The tools that I personally prefer are Confluence and Airtable for documentation and database stuff. Sounds Institute, obviously, as I mentioned, for templates. CSET is a cybersecurity evaluation tool, which I'll touch in a minute, that does all the stuff that you can pay for in a beautiful little package that runs in a micro IIS instance. It handles compliance for you incredibly well, and if you're starting off with absolutely nothing, it is a great way to learn. And then there's the commercial stuff. Those are all different vendors. Terra Nova is bonded very close with Microsoft. They do security awareness training. Fugu, as I like to call it, Fugue, does compliance scans against CIS, SOC, and others of your AWS environments. Talk about Logic. Everything I'm talking about, they can kind of, for monies, they can make happen. Blissfully does vendor management really well. Tell them who your vendors are. They collect all your information for you. Vant has another compliance tool, and so is Drata. There's a lot of them. They're emerging, and they're funded like really, really crazy. Drata just raised I think it was $25 million. It's crazy. Vanta got about $13 million this year. But you don't need any of that. You can work with just a simple documentation system. And one example of that is, one of the things I like to do is do battle cards for all of my inventory, every single mission critical asset, and for scenarios that might affect them. Confluence is great for that, or Wiki. And it's not even about the product, though. It's just a wiki that lets me do that. Create a battle card that works for you. For me, inventory is write down all the things that are material to a specific asset. And that could be an app. It could be a server. It could be, obviously, an entire environment. And then start brainstorming things that could go wrong. If one of your critical assets is your money, perhaps you will think about what happens if your CFO is eaten by a snake. Write it down, work it through. Obviously, a metaphor, but you get my point. Vendor management does not have to be hard. I've learned this the hard way. I try to make it hard, and it doesn't work. Sometimes the easiest path, the path of least resistance, is absolutely wonderful. When it comes to vendor management, you just really have to understand where they are relative to your business. And if they have a bad moment, how bad of a moment it is for you. This is straight out of one of my vendor management databases. Plug in their names. I rate them on three things. I kind of make sure I know what data they have. And this is all relational, so I can run reports and build things with it. I put out the risks that they might have. And then for me, security objective is basically how important they are to me. You can do that on your own. Anybody can do that. And this is sort of where it all comes together. If you're building a cybersecurity program, if you can figure out how you're going to run it, if you can design some of it, you can figure out how you're going to do the nitty-gritty of it, and you figure out sort of the tooling, at that point in time, an assessment makes sense. At that point in time, a vulnerability scan, a full-fledged business IT assessment, or anything else in between, a threat scan or anything like that makes sense. Because at this point, you know what you're looking for and you know what to focus on. Now it's in context of a real problem. Prior to that, it's just noise. And then you can use that to make improvements to your systems. I thought I would show you some examples. As I said, I like working with simple databases. I like building reports that I can give to people that are not technical, that give them an idea of what their business posture might be like. Often it's just a blank screen. Sometimes it isn't. This is a very simple self-assessment. None of this has to be. You don't have to begin at the NIST level. You can start simple and just focus on the things that you think are important. Or, if you really want to go all in, like I said, CSET. It's on GitHub. It's awesome. Who's heard of CSET? So who here would be interested in knowing how do you evaluate a business or your business? All right, so the list is pretty short. All right, cool. What CSET lets you do is installs, like in seconds, again, free, allows you to pick a framework, and it has a lot of choices, and allows you to select how much time you want to spend on it, whether it's 1 or 2 hours or your entire lifetime. And then it just presents you with questions that are understandable in plain language. You answer yes and no to almost all of them. But what's really neat about it is it allows you then to, it actually has explanations for what it's asking, and it shows you how to deal with it. So if you're a business manager that's non-technical, you can use this. And then what's awesome is you can then collect some information and attach it to all these questions. So you actually have a full compliance piece of software running in one spot. Would I do this long term? No, but I would absolutely do this as a starting point. Before anyone else comes in and asks for your admin credentials. You can do vulnerability scans. Built into a tool called Nmap is a scan that will tell you all the CVEs that it can see on a particular system. Really useful. One of my biggest pain points in September was Confluence on-prem, CVE, 9.8 critical rating. Botched CVE, I should say. It allowed an attacker to exploit a system and take over anything that was running. CVE was published late and inaccurately. 60,000 potential Confluence installations were affected. The attackers, before it was syndicated, already had control over many systems that were just sitting out there. And they were mining Monero. I'm assuming some transfer data and potentially will be doing ransom stuff later. CVEs are important. They do inform you, but they are only important in context of what you're trying to look at. You can't read all of that stuff. Microsoft makes it a little easier. Microsoft has a Defender tool like it. Who uses Defender? Yeah, it's really neat. It tells you your threat landscape. Again, built into your subscriptions. If you're a small company, you probably have it available. You just need to deploy it. Or it's like a click to get it on. And it sort of simplifies that approach and shows you the things that matter in context of your devices. And then there's also the compliance scans. You get more advanced, you can go ahead and buy some tools that will actually go through and take, in my case, 2,650 controls for my AWS environment and tell me that I'm doing great when they're all green. And at that point, the Christmas tree makes sense. Doing good on time? We're doing good on time. So there is no grand reveal here. Focus on fundamentals. Keep it simple. Do the basics. Do the work. It takes grunt work to learn how to build a successful cybersecurity strategy. Everyone needs to be involved. Right? We all heard that. Management needs to be involved, obviously. Small businesses have a lot to lose. It's really anticlimactic. But if you want some snake oil, I can give you some. If you're going to do nothing, you can do 3 things and still do something. This is my homeopathic remedy to cybersecurity. Be curious. Ask questions. Poke, prod. If you get a stupid email from a vendor that makes a claim, spend some time on it. You'll learn something. Be mindful. Your actions impact others. If you're a small company, you can have really big consequences on people. If you're a small business and your employees suddenly have no jobs, their livelihoods are at stake, right? So your actions really do matter. Be methodical. If you're going to agree to a process, stick to it. It's much harder, I think much harder to do in a large organization than to create exceptions than it is in a small one. Small companies will make exceptions for absolutely everything. And sticking to the process is the only way that you're going to ensure that you're doing the right thing. And because I wanted to kind of run this more or less like a magic show that I'm not really skilled at, I do have one bit of smoke and mirrors. And that is, for all of you that are information technology governance enthusiasts, maybe you found something to learn from here. But for those of you that haven't, you technically participated in a cybersecurity incident training exercise. Because you see, we had an event that appeared, in this case, an email, but it could have been anything. We confirmed it as a problem, we validated it, and we decided it was going to be an incident. Researched it further. We presented some biases, or in this case, hypotheses, of what it could be or what it couldn't be. We tested them. We then focused on what the critical functionality of the system was going to be, and hopefully I got some point across. We initiated recovery stage being an alternative process for IT governance. We isolated the root cause, scammers will scam, and I even provided you guys with a presentation that is a debrief. Thank you. I got time for questions. I hope there aren't any. I told somebody that I would probably implode if somebody asked a question. So I'm all right, I'll take one. Tom?
So in the network assessment you started out, it looked like each of the sections actually spelled out recommendations.
Yes. Generic recommendations. Right.
So were they transparent about?
I really dislike this company. They don't do any of that. This tool was written in like the early 2000s, and they just keep selling it. This is a push for cash. It's so frustrating, and it is used. The claim is it's got to be ridiculous. Like there's no way that's actually true. But no, this is like one of those things where I just keep seeing it. And I'm going. I know people are falling for it, and I probably should point this out. So one of the things that I looked at was the engagement platform. It's on here. I studied very much how they were processing those emails and how, somebody had a quota to fill. And the whole thing is someone had like 30,000 licenses that they had to sell, and they were hitting with everything. They weren't just blasting an email out of MailChimp. They had the whole machinery behind it about tracking every single, they knew how many times I viewed that email, they knew, I dug deep. Guys, I really I go down these rabbit holes all the time. This isn't like, oh, email, and then I spent hours just trying to figure out exactly who was seeing me open that email. And yeah, it's a lot. These guys were. This was a blitzkrieg to sell software that didn't cost them anything to make. Yeah, this is why it bothered me so much. Yeah, they're not controlling. This is just them. I mean, they probably stole on something, right?
There are a lot of products that can offer comfort checks.
Yeah. Doesn't make sense to do it up front. Well, maybe, in some cases it might, but most of the time, the way this is being presented, the way this is being offered. So, anything else? Thank you.